So last summer, I wasn't living at the place at the time. I was just like kind of crashing there. And my roommate, who's a pizza chef across the street, he doesn't have air conditioning on his side of the duplex. So he left his front door open. And he has a loft upstairs. And he came downstairs and there was a mama bear and two cubs in the kitchen eating the cat food. And so he just like walks right by the kitchen, goes right out the back door and like goes up the hill, and they're just like mowing down on like cat food. And then they come out, but they came back like 2 weeks later and they like put their like front legs up on like the front door, like, we want your cat food kind of thing. Yeah, it's wild out there. I love it.
That's Jesse,
fun.
good talking to you, man.
Yeah, man.
All right,
Be good.
Yeah, man. Maybe I'll run in here again and we can record more.
Welcome. This is Student of Life, the game show, game number 22.
So while I was waiting for my friends Jake and Joanna to meet me for dinner, it started to rain and I went under cover outside a restaurant, and that's where I met Jesse, and he told the story about the bear, and then my friends showed up and I had to say goodbye. So it was a quick, short recording, but pretty awesome story. And now let's hear some gypsy talk.
Study abroad in college, and I traveled with this guy. My professor at the time was one of those professors who, like, you have in college and you're like, that's the one, and you just have a favorite, you know. And he was my anthropology professor, but he also was like a linguist, and he was Hungarian and he was born in Romania. He was just like this really interesting man, but he introduced me to Joseph Campbell for the first time and played some Joseph Campbell videos in our college class. And he talked about this civilization of people that he lived with and studied and learned their language in this island. And like, I just became completely fascinated in anthropology and this guy after that, and the whole follow your bliss Joseph Campbell thing. So I was like, I want to go on a study abroad with this guy. And it was a small group. It was only about a dozen of us that went. And it was amazing. We centered out of Budapest, Hungary. But the main theme of the whole travel was gypsies and studying gypsy culture and learning about gypsy folktale and all this stuff. And it was just like being immersed directly into this world that I otherwise would have never touched, because you have to, he spoke Roma, which is the gypsy dialect, a language that only gypsies like know. And it's thought by most other like Europeans like they're like the lowest caste of low, you know, even like lower than Jews, right? In that era of like Jews than gypsies. But anyway, more in modern times, it was like so my professor, when he was a child and growing up, he ran away as a boy, and he ran away with the gypsies, and that's how he learned how to speak Roma. And he kind of traveled and lived with them for a little while and then went back to his real life. But he speaks something crazy, like he knows how to speak like 15 languages and read and write in like half of them. And he had this theory that if you could learn a language from each language family before you hit puberty, that you could learn all the languages. Like, they would just come to you after that. So basically, he knew Hungarian, which is its own, like, it's from the Finnish dialect. And then he knew Romanian, which is a Romance language because he lived in Romania. Because of communism, there was Chinese people coming to Romania. So he had a Chinese person like come and live in their home or something crazy like that when he was a kid. So he learned Chinese. He has a photographic memory. He's just like one of these people that you're just like, who are you, you know? So to travel with him and be immersed and go to all these places with him, where everywhere we went, we traveled all over Europe, he's just there speaking the language in it with the people, you know? His name is Deju. In Hungarian, you would pronounce it Deju Benedek, but in here we call it Dezo.
That's pretty good.
Yeah.
That's a good story.
And he's a professor at UGA. He's amazing. And
Wow.
so going to meet the gypsies in Romania was probably one of those days that was just like crazy day to be. You would never be in that stance unless you knew them. They would never let you in, you know, to their home. It's like, no way. You're just like these white kids from America. But because he speaks the language and knows them, like we brought, I remember, treats for them, which was like liquor and soda. And we brought that to them, and then we hung out with them and saw how they lived, and they taught us like different gypsy dances. And yeah,
So cool.
It was really cool.
I taught you gypsy dances?
Mm-hmm.
You still know them?
I mean, I can kind of remember the feel of them, but I don't really know them. So the gypsies will tell you that like they come from the moon and the stars. They have their own song of the ancestors, you know, that they believe. But when we were there, we went to this special holiday in France on the Mediterranean Ocean in a little town called Marie Saint de la Mer. And it's where gypsies from all over Europe come, like Spanish gypsies and Swedish gypsies. I mean, they've completely, but they're still gypsies. It's really interesting. They come from all over to this one town to honor their patron saint, which is the Black Madonna, which is like the statue.
What?
The Black Madonna.
Okay.
It's like their patron saint. And it's basically a statue in a church. And like they take it out, they put it on a horse, and they bring it out to the ocean, to the Mediterranean Sea, and they baptize her every year.
Huh.
And it was just wild to walk around there because you could see like all the different gypsy sects.
I'll get it with pickles, mustard and extra mustard, green peppers. Can I get extra cheese as well? Extra cheese? Yeah. And then I'll get a large Cajun, light Cajun.
Large Cajun with white Cajun on it?
Yeah, with light Cajun. And then I'll get a large drink as well.
Large drink.
Yeah.
Just to double check all this, I got a bacon cheeseburger with pickles, mustard, green peppers, extra cheese, and extra mustard.
Yeah.
Alright, and then one large Cajun fry with white Cajun. And
Yep.
then one large soda. Alright, would you like a milkshake today as well?
No. Thanks.
17.52.
All right.
Cousin Paul is back, and this time he shares with us a lot of his own family's history.
Too bad you never got to meet them.
No, I did. I knew Rose.
No, Rose, of course.
Yeah.
Joe died.
Right.
When were you born?
I remember Rose. 75.
And Joe died in 1970.
And
So
Rose
you
probably
wouldn't have
died
had
in
a
like 1980.
91.
No way.
No.
81?
That's wrong.
Okay.
She was 91 when she died. She died in 1987.
87? Wow. Okay. Alright, so. You got a good story, you said.
Gentlemen, the pie's coming.
Alright.
Oh, momentarily.
Thank you.
No. You know how they met? Joe was from Russia.
Right.
You know about how he was bullied and got his head beaten in and all. You don't know that. Your father should be the one to tell you that. Joe was from Russia. And there was a tremendous amount of anti-Semitism. He was bullied his whole life. And in Russia, they sort of liked to bully the Jews at the time. Anti-Semitism was very popular. And So Joe was bullied a good bit of his life, and well, I mean, he was young when he left Russia, but he He was on his way home from work one day, and he was walking by himself somewhere in a remote place, and he was attacked by a group of whoever they were. I think some of them were his co-workers, because he was a Jew, and they bashed his head in. He had an indentation in the back of his head, and that's how he got it. Your father knows about that. You can ask him. Anyway, so he was pretty regularly had been used to getting beaten up, but at this point he said, "I can't take this anymore."
How old was he about then?
He was, let's see.
He was already an adult. You said he was working.
Yeah, he was like maybe 20. Let me see. He came to the U.S. approximately 1912. He was born in 92. So that would have made him 20.
Right.
So maybe 1913. He was young and strong, but he was... And so one day, he just decided he was coming in. He never saw any of his family again. He said, I can't take a chance. If they find out, they'll kill me. And he never just said anything to anybody. He just left. Wow. And he managed to get here. And Rose was from Austria. God, I loved her. She was from Austria, and her mother brought her here. Thank you. Her mother brought her here. She said she'll give you a bag for that, shouldn't you? Huh? Shouldn't
No,
they
that's
put
fine.
Her mother brought her here, and her mother was like, her mother, to make a living, ran like a vegetable stand on the streets of Brooklyn, and from that vegetable stand, Grandma learned how to speak English. She had to communicate. She was helping her mother, a little kid, well, she wasn't that little, but she was a young woman, and she was helping her mother sell fruit and vegetables, and this very shy young man would walk past them every day, and it was Joe. And he'd never have anybody with him. He never smiled. And Grandma Rose took a liking to him, and every day he passed, she would give him like an apple, or people would be bringing their lunch to work, and he'd have nothing. And so every day she'd hand him a piece of fruit, or and that's how they met. And from watching her mother operate the fruit stand, Rose learned English, and she learned as much as she could about business. She wanted some kind of future for herself. She didn't know what. I mean, she wanted to find a man, of course. And she decided Joe was going to be her husband, and I think she picked him. Anyway, so Joe was a dressmaker. And they lived in this crappy little apartment in a crappy little neighborhood. Well, at that point, everyone lived in crappy apartments, and neighborhoods were crappy, but they weren't dangerous like they are now. And so Joe couldn't read or write, and he taught himself, along with Grandma's help, Rose's help, taught himself how to read, but he could hardly write. Even writing his name was hard for him, but he could do that. And he was a dressmaker, and he would go to work every day in this factory and lay out patterns, and he could really sell and do stuff like that. And one day, he had major heart attack. Couldn't work anymore. And the cardiologist in New York said, you can't work anymore. They didn't have, this was in 1952. And it was in August, July or August, the summer of 52. And so I remember going up to, after the grandpa got discharged from the hospital, Joe, I remember going up to their apartment and seeing him in bed with an oxygen. You know what an oxygen tent is? They didn't have oxygen in the nose then. They had a tent that they blasted in oxygen. And he couldn't work anymore. So he said, no, there was no Social Security then. And there was no Medicare. There was nothing. Now, Joe was not good in business, so the money that he'd take home every week, he would give to Rose. Rose ran their fights, their biggest fights used to be, Joe wanted an increase in his spending money allowance. So Joe has this heart attack, and he can't work anymore, and there's no Social Security, there's no Medicare, and he says to Rose, he says, what are we going to do? So Rose says to him, you know all those fights we had over the years about your allowance and money, and you wanted a new this or a new that, and we couldn't get it? He said, yeah, what about it? She says, well, where do you think all the money went? Joe says, well, it went somewhere because we don't have any. She says, oh, but we do. So he said, well, how much do we have? She said, I've got $25,000. What do you got?
Wow.
Which he didn't know about.
Back then, that's a lot more.
That was a lot of money back in 1952.
Yep.
And that's from saving and skimping every week.
Wow.
And emptying one ketchup jar into the next, you know? So she says, well, now Rose had a love affair with my father. She loved him as much as she loved my mother. And my father was a young man in business, you know, and he liked Rose. They had a nice thing going. So Rose said, I'm going to give the $25,000 to Bill, my father, and ask him to invest it. Joe says, okay. So they gave Rose gives the $25,000 to my father and said, this is where we find ourselves. This is what we got. I'm giving it to you. Our future's in your hands. So my father, who was an excellent businessman, he took the $25,000 and bought AT&T stock. That saved everybody.
So they lived comfortably after that because of that?
Well, they had enough money to live on, and then finally Medicare came in the mid-'60s. But that was good. But Joe couldn't believe that they had $25,000. He didn't know they had any savings at all.
Yeah, that's awesome.
You shouldn't be afraid to come in here and have that salad. It was good.
Was it good?
Yeah.
And there you have it. Student of Life, the game show. Game number 22 is in the books. Bye.